You are a huge partner to Primer and know so much about the data space. If you could tell the audience a little bit about People Data Labs and what you guys do, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah, happy to. Primer is also a big and important partner for PDL, so I was really excited to have this conversation with you. So at People Data Labs, we build B2B data, so we build data on people and companies, and we power product teams like Primer who are building end-user-facing applications with data, and we also power internal enterprise teams who are working with data at scale to accomplish HR, sales and marketing, investment research, and fraud use cases. So we serve a broad variety of users, and really our thesis is that every company is becoming a data company. And as more companies become data companies, they need partners in the data space that they can trust, that they can leverage, and that they can utilize really easily to build the products that they're trying to build.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so true that every company is becoming a data company. And this isn't a question I had planned to ask, but I think, when most people think about that fact, they're thinking about the first party data that they're generating, right? You come at it from a different angle, from, more third party data or second party, if you will. What is the growing importance of third party data in your mind?
Yeah, so first party data can always take you a certain distance, but it can never take you the full distance. The advantage of working with a third-party data provider is twofold. One, there's always data that we can acquire that an individual first party probably doesn't have access to. For example, data from other first parties. Combining, cleaning, merging that data and providing it as a holistic data source can be extremely valuable. And then the second use case, which I think is very important in our context of workforce data, is even when data is publicly available, or data is available on the web, or data is acquirable from other third parties, the actual work to turn that into a usable data source that can enhance first party data is really, really difficult. And so that's where third party data providers, I think, really generate a lot of value for businesses, is they simplify the workflow and the goals towards getting you an easy to use third party data source versus needing to go out, build an acquisition team, build a compliance team, build all these facets yourself. There's someone else doing that for you. And I think that's really, really valuable.
Or, considering our audience here, going into Clay and trying to create these complex, data pipelines, workflows. You used to be hiring offshore teams. There's a lot. I think until you get into it, of combining, cleaning, normalizing, structuring data, you don't realize just how much work it is. There's a reason there's a supply chain to this industry.
100%. And one thing you'll hear me say so many times today in different ways is things are a sliding scale, right? And the amount of complexity and effort that you need to put in to do something will give you more control and more precision, but you're always trading that off against other priorities. So for some folks, using a tool like Clay is a great middle ground. For other folks, using the raw data is a great option. For other folks, using an end platform is a great option. It really depends on how much time you want to spend actually diving into the data versus how much time you want to spend, working on other problems and other projects. And that just varies based on the business and the strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's very true. And one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is sort of the different axes of data, right? You're talking, there's the quality, there's quantity, there's the specificity of certain data points. I'm curious what you see happening in the world of kind of go-to-market B2B data these days.
Yeah, I think the thing that we've been telling a lot of our customers and prospects is that it seems like the buyers are getting a lot more sophisticated. Back in the day, there sort of used to be this big emphasis on what I call more data, which is just what are the vanity metrics that you can push out and how big can you make them? How many contacts do you have? How many companies do you have? How many profiles are you updating? How fast are you updating them? Those are the things that really, really mattered. And people were just taking those numbers at face value and looking for the biggest numbers possible. Nowadays, I think there's been a big shift towards what I categorically call better data. Where the industry is really moving away from looking at these volume and vanity metrics to prioritize data quality and understand data quality at a deeper level. And also for people who aren't spending as much time working on data quality, focusing on things that are actionable, focusing on insights that their team can actually use and leverage in their outreach or use and leverage in their targeting. So finding, higher intent accounts, finding higher intent users. That sort of shift to better data is becoming more and more emphasized, especially, I think people are talking about like response rates going down across the board,
Right.
sort of the amount of spam that people are receiving dramatically increasing.
Yeah.
Getting better at your messaging and getting higher quality data becomes more and more important. And I think that's leading buyers to become a lot more sophisticated.
Do you think when you talk about, some of that is specificity, right? Really trying to understand, the different aspects of, your target account or target, contact, something like that. But is that what's really driving the push towards quality? Or are there other things that matter?
Yeah, I also think that like just the spend environment has significantly changed, and as people are, reducing their tools, reducing, their headcount, people are really trying to figure out what are the things that they can do that maximize their ROI. So getting the most bang for the least buck, whether that's making their team more productive with some of these more like actionable insights, or making sure that the data that they're using is actually providing value and that they can understand it. Those are things that we hear very frequently from customers. And then also because we power a lot of platforms like Primer, we also hear secondhand from a really broad range of customers, because our customers are telling them these things. And then they're coming back to us and saying, hey, if your data is not fresh, hey, if my customers are not successfully able to reach out to people, hey, if your contact data is not high quality, those are things that are impacting my customers' experience and causing them to churn off of my platform. Right. And so we see just this really broad range of these like ROI driven and quality driven decisions being made. Whereas, in the bubble period of 2021, when you would buy a tool for every single purpose-built thing that you were thinking about doing, or make a hire for every single problem that you had, people weren't thinking as much about ROI and quality, I think.
Well, the other thing that leaps to my mind is similar to the whole first party data. It's data is data, whether it's first or third party, but you're trying to action, off of data points, and the quality of the actions is only going to be as commensurate with the quality of the data. So if you're shooting an email and it bounces, that's going to hurt you a lot more than it used to, because of spam filters. If you're trying to send a cold email and break through the noise and something's off in the data point, and then I think a lot about, and this is like maybe going a little futuristic, but AI workflows are being built more and more on top of your internal first party or third party data, and if the quality of that data is not good, then how are you supposed to actually get the productivity gains that's supposed to promise?
Yeah, 100%. And I think for us in the position of being a data aggregator, right, who we're dealing with data on the orders of magnitude of millions and billions of data points, not thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands like an individual marketer. We have to figure out how do we create practices and how do we build technology that actually solves some of those problems at scale, because each individual end user that's using our data experiences a different pool of people. And we want to make sure that every single end user of our data has a really high quality experience with our data.
That's a momentous task.
And we're not perfect at it. No one is perfect at it. We just try to be the best we can.
That's one of the things that no data provider is perfect. But every sales rep gets really upset if there's one contact that's off, and it's sort of like the bigger scheme, guys. Let's think about the bigger scheme. I'm curious about the quality side of things. Where do you see that? Are there certain types of data or data points where you see quality mattering more or the most?
Yeah, I think the thing that matters the most to our customers is like current title, current company, which has always been the thing that matters the most. That's like the center for so many other elements that people are using in a lot of their outreach today. Like if you're reaching out to someone and they're no longer at the job, that's the most painful thing in the world, right? It's highly likely that their email is going to bounce. It's highly likely if you call them on their phone, they're going to be like, I'm not there anymore. Why are you calling me? What data provider did you get this from? Making sure that data is accurate is really important. And I think there's a lot of challenges related to that. And then secondarily behind that, I think information about the company is becoming more and more important. There's some company data attributes that I think generally in the market are not very, very accurate. And we're trying to raise the bar on them a little bit. And then also
you gotta click into that. What are the ones?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'm a big hater on revenue. You know, we've done a lot of digging on how a lot of different data providers generate the revenue. And there are some providers that claim they get it first party. There are some providers that claim that they infer it. There are some providers that claim somewhere in the middle. But generally, even the providers that are getting it first party are doing some level of inference. And they're all sort of doing the same calculus, which is using the employee headcount as a way of forecasting revenue. You know, there are some providers that don't do that, but generally that's what everyone is doing. And as a data person, as soon as I hear that there are inputs being put into a model and an output is being spat out, my gut reaction is I just want to use the inputs. And so I hear so many companies requesting of us, requesting of other providers, the revenue information and using that as like their core element for account segmentation, for identifying accounts in their ICP. But, you know, headcount, I think is a much better measure. And then getting accurate headcount data becomes a lot more important, right? If you don't have accurate headcount data and that's leading to inaccurate revenue, it's a lot more traceable than if you have inaccurate headcount data, you're not exposing it, and then you're getting an inaccurate revenue number out of it. So using those in concert, I think is really, really important as well.
Well, and that gets to, I think, something that you taught me a while back that I find really fascinating, which is what is accurate headcount data and how, what are some of the challenges that you see around calculating that, figuring out current, company, current title? There's more to these data points than most marketers realize.
Yeah. I think the root of this challenge, if we were to zoom out, is everybody wants to be able to evaluate whether data is accurate. And evaluating accuracy is really, really challenging. So the typical way that people evaluate accuracy when they can is they look at a verified source of truth. And for some fields, there is a verified source of truth, and for others, there isn't. For example, I can always tell you what People Data Labs' headcount is. In the same way, Keith, you could probably tell me what Primer's headcount is, hopefully. But outside of that, you don't really know. And so what people do is they Google People Data Labs headcount or Primer headcount. And there's different results that come up. Some of them are other data providers, which, it's hard to trust them as a source of truth. Some people use SEC filing data to get public company headcounts, which is obviously accurate because, the company is registering it with the SEC, but there's different factors like the type of employment that the person has that change that. And it's only updated once a year. So it's once you move past that filing date, it's no longer accurate anymore to a level of precision. And then the final source that a lot of people use a lot of the time is LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is also, calculating their headcount off of their own data and off of their own calculus using all of the employees in the pool of the public world of LinkedIn. And, none of these sources are 100% accurate. So you really have to take anything that you're looking at with a grain of salt and try to use them in concert to get to an answer. A lot of times we get compared and dinged if we don't have 100% accuracy compared to one of these sources that, an individual customer views as a source of truth. And, our sales team and our solutions engineering team spend a lot of time with customers showing them how we calculate the headcount, because I think that builds a lot of trust. Going back to, my point before about revenue, the deeper you can go and the more granular you can go into how something is happening, the more confidence you can build for a customer, the more confidence you can build as a user. And I think that's really, really important. And I think, Keith, you might have just disconnected. So I'm just going to sit here in silence. Yes, I can. I finished my sentence, and then so it's easy to cut, and it won't even look like you disappeared.
Perfect. Yeah, Wi-Fi just crapped out for a sec. Okay, so this is probably the biggest myth that I find customers have. Because they don't know the ins and outs of the data world, that there is a source of truth, right? And I think what you're saying is there is no singular source of truth. So how do you recommend if if truth is in the eye of the beholder, how do you recommend people make decisions based on this data?
Yeah, I think as much as you can, you should be using sources of truth that you know. So your CRM can often be as good of a source of truth as possible. I won't deride my friends, the salespeople, for their Salesforce hygiene, but it's good enough in most cases. You can also use known information. So a lot of times investors are willing to share some information and insights about their portfolio companies, for example. Those are ways that I've seen companies really assess source of truth for company data. For person data, obviously checking sources of truth for certain attributes, like LinkedIn is typically the most up-to-date place for somebody's employment. So checking things like that, I think is really valuable. And that's a good tier one, right? Help you eliminate and trim some of the fat of, data providers that are, grossly inaccurate. And then if you're really weighing, multiple providers that you feel like are pretty good, I think it's just actually testing them in action, in production, building a clear data test plan where you have clear ROI metrics that you're tracking and you're seeing how different providers stack up on those ROI metrics is something that I don't see people doing always. A lot of times the match rates and the fill rates, some of those quote unquote like more data metrics end up becoming the basis of the evaluation. And then when it comes to using the data in production, you see different results than the fill rates actually told you. I'm a data provider, so I always say, don't trust me for what I'm saying, like actually use my data and tell me how it is, because for us, like we only make money, our customers only make money if our data is good and the feedback is really valuable. So we want our customers to be using our data, when they're evaluating us in their production use cases and giving us a sense of, how are we performing? How do we stack up? What's missing? And often it leads to some really, really cool insights.
Well, I think that's really interesting that you mentioned, kind of trying to calculate the ROI of the data. What are some specific techniques that you've seen people do for that? I don't think it's probably something that's commonly well understood.
Yeah, I think it depends on the industry. We have such a broad range of customers.
Let's talk like marketing
focusing
and sales.
on sales and marketing. People upload slices of data to ad platforms, right? And look at just the basic ROI metrics that you can extract from an ad platform, run different campaigns with different data sets and see what happens. It's not always the most statistically significant sample in the world, but it always gives you some directional insight. Also, sometimes people will do like hand checking tests for like a certain number of people. There's actually services now that do this for certain data attributes, which I really appreciate. I think it's a great service. TitanX is an example for phone numbers where you can. Sorry,
could you say that name?
Yeah, TitanX. They used to be called Phone Ready Leads, I believe. They have a team that will do a series of steps of validation for phone numbers that can include actually calling the phone and validating the person at the other end, and they give you a score and a rating.
So those are those random texts I get from like a random number that just says "Hey." It's like checking the deliverability of.
So that I believe is phishing, and you should not reply to those. But yes, I mean, I do think there's sometimes some of the spam calls that you get could be validation for sure. Which not encouraging spam calls, but I think if you're thinking from a B2B marketing perspective, it's really nice for a small sample of people to understand how accurate and actionable those phone numbers are. Because you hand them to your salespeople and they call them and they say, hey, 3 are wrong, and you can say, hey, well, I called 1,000 of them and 90% plus were right. This was the best provider on the market. Different data providers who are a little bit more end user facing have also taken similar approaches. I know Cognizant has like their platinum ready to call tier of phone numbers, for example.
Right.
I think that's like where the market is trending, right? Like people are very, very focused on making sure that things are actionable, things are usable. And the more that you can test that, the more that you can validate that, those are the important metrics to be looking at when evaluating different data providers.
Is there sort of a margin of accuracy that you like? You mentioned some data providers who are wildly inaccurate, right? But then we also discussed the fact that accuracy is sometimes hard when there's no singular source of truth for headcount, for example. So, I think one thing that I've come to terms with is just some acceptance that yes, like maybe, I've got my companies that are in 100 to 200 headcount range, and there's going to be, some spread there that in reality fall outside of that. And that's has to be okay. Otherwise, I just get stuck in data jail. I can't take any action. What is like, how do you talk to other people, consumers of your data, about acceptable margin of accuracy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it really varies data point to data point. And I think generally the way we've started to benchmark ourselves is looking at how we perform against other providers and just trying to keep raising the standard and raising the watermark. And it's not only us raising the standard and raising the watermark. There are some, great providers out there alongside us who are pushing us to be better. A lot of our roadmap is, we hear from customers, XYZ provider is better at ABC attribute or ABC point of accuracy. And that drives our roadmap. But, I think sometimes there's also things that I think are less important, right? So like one thing we've been seeing in the competitive landscape a lot is a push for faster and faster data updates. And at some point in our type of data where people change jobs, people are not changing jobs every second or every minute or every hour or even every day. There's sort of this idea that the fresher and fresher the data gets, the better it is. And that's not necessarily true. It's about the aggregate accuracy, right? Like the number of titles and companies who are accurate for people at a given moment. And so I encourage people to like look away from those things and think about, what is the true benchmark that they care about for that data attribute, and build around that, stack rank around that. And we have, I'm happy to share more, certain benchmarks that we focus on for our data that we think are the most important.
Please. Yeah. Elaborate.
Yeah. So one is, we think about the quality of different people and how high priority they are to our customers. I hate to say that we're ranking the quality of people, but really it's about, how likely is this person to update their profile, and how likely is our customer base to care and notice that their profile was updated. And so we track our ability to update those different, groups of people at different cadences and make sure that we're updating them at the right cadence. And then what we also do is we're constantly evaluating other providers in the market. And so we'll actually go and benchmark how we're performing for those different tiers against other providers. And we'll see, this provider has shown that there's a percentage of people that we were not updating, but, they were all in our bottom tier of profiles that nobody cares about because they're probably bots. And, when we see things like that, we're like, okay, we're doing pretty good. But if we see, hey, like our top tier of profiles, the profiles that we care about, we're not updating them fast enough, or we're missing updates. Those are things that cause us to go back and think about experimenting or changing, or improving the sources that we're using to update our job data, for example. Another example that I'm really grateful for is, some third parties have started evaluating different providers independently and publishing ranking lists. And, we've got great partners out there who will share that data with us at a more granular level, and we can use that to improve our data or improve our logic to make our data better.
What are some examples of folks publishing studies like that?
Yeah, Clay has been like the most collaborative. Stefan and the team over there are awesome. They've just been doing a lot of work. They position themselves as a friend to all, a waterfall of different data providers. And I think they've done like a really great job at really understanding to a granular level what matters in terms of different data attributes for their customers, and then telling providers how they stack up in terms of those KPIs. And that's really pushed us to make some big improvements to our contact data in the last year and a half. So we've really appreciated having them as a partner.
Cool. Love that. Last, I think, question is, what are some exciting new types of data or data points that you're seeing the market begin to embrace, and why?
Yeah, I'll give you one that I think is very, very hot, and then I'll give you two that I think are not as hot, but I like better. So the one that is very, very hot right now is using reverse IP to identify people or companies who are visiting your site. I think this is great in terms of it feels like a silver bullet to a lot of people. Where, hey, I know exactly who's visiting my site. I can reach out to them and contact them. But it's not a silver bullet for a couple of reasons in my mind. One is no provider is super accurate here. So it becomes a game of combining a lot of different providers, which is totally achievable. But I think that, it just makes it like a little bit more complicated to use than I think people initially anticipate when working with any single provider. There's some tools that are doing a great job of aggregating different providers. And I think, they're going to continue to sort of drive the market forward a little bit there. But then the second is what I always call like the front page test of like, what are people going to be comfortable with in terms of, what they as humans want to happen to them. And people are okay with their phone being called. People are okay with being emailed, on average. People are not okay if someone is like tracking where they are on the internet when they assume that they're anonymous. And there's been, so many different types of legislation and conversation in the media about, cookies, for example, and like ad tech companies tracking your browsing history and your location. And to me, and this is an opinion, and I will, say that many times, but I just don't feel comfortable like knowing that companies can de-anonymize me. And I think a lot of other users feel that way too. So my sense is that is not a sustainable silver bullet going into the future. I do think trying to understand what companies and people are trying to do, though, is really, really valuable. So two other intent or company categorization signals that we've started to see some companies use are, one, leveraging the job postings of a company to really understand deeply what a company is doing, using that to train messaging. So like a lot of this agentic messaging is using job postings, and also identify what tools a company is using, because they'll often reveal those in their job postings. And then sometimes companies will reveal things in their job postings that they would not reveal publicly in any other way. Like as a data guy, one of the ones that I always bring up is when you have a data partnerships role, so someone who's responsible for acquiring data, companies will often put the budget that person will hold in their job posting. And if I went to Keith right now and said, Keith, what's your data buying budget? Keith would never tell me, but he will tell his data partnerships person that he's listing in the job posting, you will control a 7-figure data budget, for example.
Right.
And so there's a lot of really, really great signal on job postings that I think people are underutilizing. And then the really cool one that there's a couple of companies that are doing a really great job of this at scale is just getting every single piece of public content that a company is putting out and combining it to really help drive really targeted messaging and understand more about what a company is doing. So that could be their web pages, that could be their blogs, press releases, case studies, taking all of that, sort of hoovering it up, sticking it into an LLM, and really generating some really, really impressive messaging, really impressive descriptions of companies. Just to name a couple of names of tools that I think are doing a great job here. Pogio Labs has a really, really cool product. I got to talk to their team in San Francisco a couple of months ago, and I think they're doing really interesting stuff. I've seen tools like Harmonic, which are, tools that VCs are using for identifying companies to invest in, have started to do some really awesome work here. And then, PDL is starting to do some work here as well, as we think about how we tag and bag our companies. So I would be, remiss and get in trouble with our marketing team if I did not say, that we also really see this as very, very valuable, both the job postings and all of this other public company text that's available. And we want to be providing that to all these different products that are, building sort of the next wave of, tools for outreach, tools for identifying your ICP, tools for identifying, your like what a company is doing, industry, et cetera.
Yeah. And hi, Lindsay. We know you're listening from the marketing team.
Yes. I'm in a very tiny room in our office, and I had to kick Lindsay out because it's just too small and claustrophobic in here. But she will listen, and she will be very happy that I plugged our own company, which I think I'm supposed to do on podcasts.
Love that. Yeah. It helps.
It helps a little,
great. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ben. This has been, I think, hopefully an illuminating conversation for others. And it definitely sort of cements some of the things you've taught me over the course of the last couple of years. Really appreciate the time. Love your shirt choice. And, look forward to, maybe chatting more in the future about some other topics and sharing it with the rest of the community.
Yeah, Keith, as you know from our very long friendship, I am willing to talk forever. So yeah, happy to come on and chat at any time.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right. Have a great rest of your Friday.
Yeah, you too. Talk soon.
Okay. Just stopped. That was great. I'll trim it up, clean it up and shoot it over. But yeah,
sweet.
Thanks, man.
That's great.
I actually, while I have you,